She had stopped crossing the threshold of her son's room the day the house fell into that strange, hollow quiet, the kind that stretches between walls and lingers on objects untouched. The door stayed half-closed, as if the smallest opening could spill memories she wasn't ready to face. His bed remained exactly as he had left it, the blanket slightly crooked, the pillow carrying the faint imprint of a head that would never return to weigh it down. For months, she passed by without looking inside. Passing was easier than stopping. Stopping meant remembering, and remembering meant hurting in ways that scraped the breath from her chest. She tried to busy herself with routines, but every evening the silence pressed back, reminding her of what the house no longer held. It was during one of these evenings, while carrying out a bag of recycling, that she first noticed the dog, a thin, spotted creature, sitting at the edge of her driveway as though he had been waiting for something precise. His eyes held a tired softness, a kind of patient surrender that only animals who have lived too much solitude seem to carry. She expected him to leave as she approached, but he didn't. He simply observed her, quietly, as if memorizing the rhythm of her steps. Over the following days, he kept returning, always to the same spot, always with the same stillness. She started leaving a bowl of water, then food. He accepted both gently, as if careful not to ask for too much. She told herself she wasn't adopting him, not officially, not emotionally. She didn't feel capable of opening any new door inside herself. But the dog came anyway, and she didn't send him away. One morning, the air carried an unusual lightness, a thin haze floating above the grass, the kind that makes even ordinary objects appear softer. The dog was at the back porch, waiting. When she opened the door, he stepped forward, then paused, glancing briefly toward the hallway that led to her son's room. She felt a sudden tightness in her chest. That hallway had become a line she didn't cross, and the idea of anyone or anything walking toward it stirred something she didn't want to name. But the dog didn't move further. He simply observed the space, ears slightly lifted, as though listening to a sound she couldn't hear. She shook off the sensation, told herself she was imagining meanings where there were none, and returned to her tasks. Yet the moment stayed with her, small but persistent. Later that afternoon, she found a worn tennis ball on the back porch, faded, frayed, unmistakably familiar. Her son had carried it everywhere when he was younger, tossing it absent-mindedly from hand to hand, spinning it across the kitchen floor to make their old retriever chase after it. She hadn't seen that ball in years. It should have been in the memory box she kept in the attic. She told herself it must have rolled out of some forgotten place. Things resurfaced in homes all the time, but still its sudden presence felt deliberate, as though the house was gently placing something back into her palms. The dog lay near the ball, paws tucked under his chest, eyes half closed. As she approached, he lifted his head and nudged the object toward her with quiet intention. She felt her throat tighten again, but this time differently. Not sharp, not unbearable, just noticeable, like a knot loosening a single thread. That night, she dreamed for the first time in months. She saw only light, soft, warm, shifting like sunlight through a curtain. No figures, no voices, just a calm presence that felt familiar in the way a childhood melody does. When she awoke, the silence of the house didn't feel as heavy. Something inside her had tilted, almost imperceptibly, but enough. The next morning, she found the dog asleep beside her bedroom door, breathing in slow, even waves, and without fully understanding why, she let him stay close as she moved through the day. She didn't speak to him. She didn't pet him. She simply allowed his quiet companionship to rest near her grief, without demanding anything from it. But everything changed the afternoon. She washed the sheets, a task she had avoided for too long. Carrying the laundry basket through the hallway, she paused near her son's door. The sunlight fell in a narrow stripe across the floor, illuminating dust suspended like tiny drifting stars. She felt her breath slow, her fingers tightening around the basket's edges. Before she could turn away, the dog trotted softly down the hall. He stopped beside her, then looked up, waiting. He seemed neither hesitant nor bold, just present, in a way that felt strangely grounded, as though he understood this doorway, this threshold, this fragile moment she had been skirting for months. She told herself she should stop him, keep the boundary intact, but she didn't move. She didn't speak. She just watched as he nudged the door with his nose, pushing it open with quiet, almost reverent care. And then, with a slow, deliberate motion, he stepped inside and walked toward the untouched bed. He circled once, then once more, turning in a gentle spiral, before lowering himself onto the exact place where her son used to sleep. His body settled softly into the hollow that had remained empty for so long. The shape of him aligned too precisely with the memory imprinted on the sheets, and in that stillness, impossibly tendered, something inside her finally cracked open. She stood at the doorway, unable to look away. The air felt different in the room, not brighter, not warmer, just fuller, as though memory itself had taken a breath. She didn't enter, not yet, but she didn't step back either. For the first time in months, she let the door remain open. The days that followed seemed to move with a different rhythm, as if the house itself had exhaled after holding too much for too long. She found herself pausing by the open door more often, letting her gaze wander just a little further each time. The dog had claimed her son's bed with a kind of gentle loyalty, never restless, never intrusive. He simply rested there, curled into the quiet shape her grief had left behind. She didn't understand why he chose that spot, and she didn't try to. Some truths didn't need to be named. They existed in the small spaces between moments, carried by instinct rather than explanation. But every time she saw him breathing softly against the pillow, something inside her steadied, as if a trembling thread had finally found an anchor. One morning, while straightening the living room, she noticed a faint scent drifting from the hallway. The unmistakable trace of the lavender detergent her son insisted on using. She hadn't opened his drawers or touched his clothes since the day she folded them for the last time. The scent should have faded months ago, yet there it was, subtle but unmistakably real, floating through the air in a way that made her close her eyes. It wasn't overwhelming or sudden. It was a whisper, a small, tender echo of a routine she once took for granted. She followed it almost without thinking, stopping where the light from the window fell across the floorboards. The dog was lying on the bed again, half awake, his breathing calm, and beside him, barely visible at first, was a folded corner of cloth peeking out from beneath the pillow. Her son's old handkerchief, the one he always tucked into his pocket when he went on long walks. She hadn't seen it since the funeral. She knew she hadn't placed it there. For a moment, her pulse quickened with the old instinct to pull back, to avoid the memories rushing forward. But the dog lifted his head and looked at her, not with expectation, but with a kind of patient reassurance, as if to say she wasn't standing alone in this room anymore. The fear of opening old wounds felt smaller now, replaced by a quiet curiosity she didn't recognize in herself. She reached for the handkerchief with slow, deliberate care. The fabric was softer than she remembered, the edges slightly worn. Holding it brought back the image of her son leaning against the porch railing, the cloth dangling from his fingers while he laughed at something she could no longer recall. The memory was gentle, not sharp. It brushed against her instead of piercing through. The dog watched her closely before resting his head back on the pillow, as though settling into that moment with her. She let herself sit on the edge of the doorway, still hesitant to cross fully into the room, but no longer resisting the pull. Her breath evened out, moving with the quiet rhythm of the space rather than against it. That night, her dreams returned, not as stories but as sensations, soft breezes, shifting shadows, the weightless warmth of presence without form. She woke with her eyes damp, but the tears didn't frighten her. They felt like something long overdue, breaking through the dry ache that had held her captive for months. In the morning, she found the dog waiting by the threshold again, not inside the room this time, not leading her anywhere, just sitting, steady and grounded, as if guarding the fragile progress made in the past few days. She realized she had begun to rely on him, his quiet guidance, his intuitive stillness. He asked for nothing, yet he gave something she hadn't known she needed, feeling a flicker of something close to courage. She stepped past him and crossed into the room fully for the first time. The air felt heavy with memory, but not suffocating. Her fingers brushed across the dresser, tracing faint patterns of dust that had settled like a soft veil. She opened the top drawer, expecting an overwhelming rush, but instead found a strange, gentle calm. Objects she hadn't touched in months seemed to greet her without accusation, just simple reminders of a life lived with tenderness. The dog jumped onto the bed behind her, circling once before settling down again in the same indentation. She glanced back at him, and for the first time since her son's passing, she allowed herself to step closer to the bed. Her hand hovered over the blanket, trembling slightly, before she finally laid her palm on the fabric. It was cool, but not cold. Familiar, but changed. Then she noticed something small near the foot of the bed, a wooden bead, a single one, smooth and dark, from the bracelet her son used to wear. The bracelet had broken years before, scattering beads across the yard. She had found most of them back then, but never all. This one looked almost new, untouched by weather or time. She picked it up slowly. It fit perfectly between her fingers, like a small pulse of memory. She didn't need to wonder how it had gotten there. The question itself felt irrelevant. Some moments existed to be felt, not solved. She sat on the edge of the bed, the bead warm now in her palm. The dog shifted closer, laying his head gently on her knee. She didn't flinch. She didn't pull away. The contact felt steadying, like a bridge between what she had lost and what she was beginning to reclaim. For the first time, she whispered a thank you, not to the room, not to the objects, not even fully to the dog, more to the quiet current moving through her life, soft but undeniable, guiding her toward a place she thought she would never reach again. She closed her eyes, letting the presence of the moment wash over her, and felt the faintest warmth settle in her chest, as if a long-closed window had finally opened to let fresh air in. When she looked up, the room didn't feel abandoned anymore. It felt inhabited by memory, held lightly rather than gripped with pain. The dog remained still beside her, breathing evenly, grounding her with a steadiness she hadn't felt in a long time, and for the first time, she knew she would return to the room again, maybe tomorrow, maybe the next day, but she would return, not because she was ready, but because something gentle was leading her there, step by quiet step. Over the next week, the room became less of a boundary and more of a passage she could approach without bracing herself. She didn't rush the process. She moved slowly, letting each moment unfold at its own pace, like a fragile leaf drifting along a quiet stream. The dog's presence remained steady, always near, never demanding. A silent companion threading himself into the fabric of her days. Sometimes she found him lying on the hallway rug, his body aligned with the doorway as if he were keeping watch over something she had once feared entering. Other times he rested inside the room, positioned with an uncanny precision on the same side of the bed. Breathing softly into the linens as though tending to an old warmth he alone remembered. One afternoon, while rearranging a stack of books on the dresser, she came across a photograph tucked beneath them. Her breath caught not with pain, but with that delicate tremor of recognition that comes when an image returns at the exact moment the heart is ready for it. It showed her son as a child, holding out a biscuit to a stray puppy they'd once found wandering near the park. She had forgotten this moment, forgotten how radiant his eyes had been, as he knelt in the grass with the tiny dog trembling in his hands. The picture felt like a small lantern lighting up a corner of memory she hadn't visited in years. The dog on the bed lifted his head at the same instant, watching her with a knowing stillness. Not curiosity, not expectation, something subtler on awareness that seemed to settle in the space between them. She didn't try to explain it away. Some connections were not meant to be untangled. They were meant to be felt. That evening, as the sun dipped low and bathed the hallway in a muted orange glow, she decided to open the small wooden box her son had kept on his nightstand. It had remained untouched for months, its delicate hinge sealed by the weight of her hesitation. As she lifted the lid, the soft creak of the wood sounded almost like a sigh. Inside, she found an assortment of small objects, some she remembered vividly, others she had forgotten entirely. A ticket stub from a rainy day movie, a dried clover, a button from a jacket long donated. At the bottom, nestled beneath the small keepsakes, lay a piece of folded paper. She unfolded it slowly. It was a simple list of places he wanted to visit in the summer: a trail by the lake, the old lighthouse by the coast, a tiny bakery 2 towns away. Nothing extraordinary, but seeing his handwriting steady, rounded, familiar brought a soft ache to her throat. A gentle ache, not a breaking one. The dog stepped down from the bed and came to sit at her feet. He didn't look at the list. He didn't need to. His presence grounded her, keeping her from slipping into the old spiral of what-ifs and unspoken grief. She let the paper rest on her lap, feeling the weight of its quiet hopes, and allowed herself to imagine the journey he had wanted to take, not with regret but with gratitude for the dreams he carried. In the days that followed, the house began to shift in small, almost imperceptible ways. Light lingered longer in certain rooms. The silence softened. Even her steps felt different, less burdened, more intentional. She noticed details she had overlooked for months. The gentle pattern of shadows moving across the living room wall, the scent of dew clinging to morning air, the way the dog's ears twitched at sounds she couldn't detect. One morning, she found the dog waiting by the back door, his posture alert yet calm. When she opened it, he trotted toward the yard, stopping near the old maple tree where her son used to sit during summer evenings. She followed slowly, her feet brushing through damp grass. The dog settled beneath the low branches, nose pressed gently to the earth, as though acknowledging something she couldn't see, but could somehow feel a trace. A memory, a quiet echo in the soil. She stood there, hands resting at her sides, letting the breeze move around her, carrying with it the faint scent of leaves and distant rain. For the first time since her loss, she felt the world expand again, no longer confined to the tight space of her grief. The air felt larger, kinder, as if making room for her. Later that afternoon, she returned to her son's room with a small intention in mind. Nothing overwhelming, nothing symbolic. She simply wanted to open the window. The moment the cool air drifted inside, a strand of the curtain lifted slightly, brushing against the edge of the bed. The dog stirred, adjusting his position, and in that tiny shift, she noticed something partially tucked beneath the pillow. A thin ribbon, pale blue, the same color as the collar her son had once tied around their old retriever's neck. She hadn't seen that ribbon since the day they packed away the dog's things after he passed. She held it gently between her fingers, feeling the fabric's softness. It didn't surprise her this time. It didn't unsettle her. It felt like a continuation, another quiet thread weaving memory into the present, reminding her that nothing truly disappears. It simply changes shape. She sat on the floor beside the bed, her back resting against the frame, the ribbon draped across her palm. The dog curled beside her, pressing his warm body close enough for her to feel his breath. Slow and constant, she let herself stay there for a long while, not thinking, not resisting, just existing within the delicate convergence of memory, loss, and the strange, gentle guidance of a creature who seemed to understand the unspoken lines of her heart. The room no longer felt like a sealed place of sorrow. It felt like a quiet sanctuary Soph lived in, touched by presence rather than absence. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, she knew something with a calm certainty. She was no longer standing at the outer edge of her grief. She was moving through it, guided, steadied, accompanied by a presence that had entered her life at the exact moment she could no longer bear the silence. In the quiet days that followed, she found herself moving through the house with a new steadiness, as though some inner compass had realigned itself without her noticing. The dog walked beside her more often now, not in a way that clung or followed, but as a calm extension of the space she was slowly reclaiming. He blended into her routines with a quiet intuition, appearing in doorways at moments that felt almost purposefully timed, slipping into the rhythm of her healing with an ease she didn't try to explain. One morning, after waking from a dream that left a lingering warmth on her skin, she realized something subtle had changed. The dream itself had been simple soft light drifting across water, the sound of leaves brushing together, the kind of peace that doesn't ask for recognition. When she opened her eyes, she felt no confusion or ache, just a sense of arrival, as if a long internal journey had led her to a place she hadn't known she was seeking. She rose from bed and walked toward the hallway. The air was cool, carrying a faint scent of grass from the open window. The dog was already there, sitting with his head tilted slightly, watching her with steady eyes. She paused, taking in the quiet intimacy of the moment, then continued toward her son's room. The door stood open, as it had for weeks now, but today the space beyond it felt subtly transformed, less like a preserved memory and more like a place that belonged gently to the present. When she stepped inside, the soft morning light had gathered across the bed in a pale golden wash. Dust motes drifted through the beams, moving in slow, unhurried patterns, like tiny messengers in the still air. The dog lifted himself onto the bed, circling before settling once more into the familiar hollow. It was no longer a place of absence, but a place shaped by presence, quiet, continuous, tender. She walked to the dresser and opened the drawer where she had left the list of places her son wanted to visit. Her fingers rested on the folded paper for a moment before she lifted it gently. Then, without fully meaning to, she sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress dipped slightly under her weight, creating a shared space she had avoided for so long. The dog shifted closer, his body warm against her leg. She unfolded the paper and let her eyes trace the familiar handwriting. The lake trail, the lighthouse, the bakery 2 towns away. Each destination felt like a small constellation of intentions, suspended in time. She no longer felt overwhelmed by what could not be completed. Instead, she felt something softer, a quiet urge to honor the paths he had once imagined walking. Not as an obligation, not as a ritual, simply as a continuation of a story that had never really ended. As she held the list, something slipped from the folds and fell softly onto the blanket. A small metal tag, worn around the edges, engraved with a single word. It had belonged to their old retriever's simple charm that used to jingle lightly whenever he ran across the yard. She hadn't seen it in years. The sight of it felt like an echo, gentle and unforced. Rising from a place she thought time had sealed away, she picked it up slowly, feeling the faint imprint of her son's fingers somewhere within the memory of it. The dog beside her lifted his head, sniffing the charm as if recognizing some distant thread woven through its metal. Then he placed his paw lightly against her knee, an unspoken gesture that felt like a quiet bridge between past and present. She closed her hand around the charm and let her shoulders fall with a long, slow breath. There was no sharpness in the moment, no sudden surge of grief, just an overwhelming softness, as though something inside her had finally unclenched. Later that afternoon, she decided to walk to the edge of the property, where the trees opened into a narrow path. The dog followed at her side. The trail curved gently, leading toward a small clearing she rarely visited anymore. As she reached it, she felt a strange familiarity settle over her, an echo of memories she hadn't touched in years. Her son had loved this spot. He used to sit beneath the tall pines, sketching shapes in the dirt with a stick, lost in the quiet hum of the world around him. The wind picked up, carrying the faint scent of pine resin and warm soil. The dog walked ahead, stopping beside a patch of earth softened by fallen needles. He turned back to her, waiting. She knelt slowly, feeling the ground steady beneath her. As she brushed her hand across the earth, her fingers grazed something small and smooth. Another bead, dark wood, warm from the sun. The twin to the one she had found in the room. She didn't question it. She simply held it, letting its small weight settle into her palm. The moment felt like a quiet closing of a circle, enforced, unannounced, deeply right. The dog lay beside her, resting his head on his paws. She sat there with him, listening to the rustle of leaves overhead, the shifting of light across the clearing, the silence that no longer felt empty. When she finally stood, the bead clenched loosely in her hand. She felt something inside her align with the gentle rhythm of the day. The heaviness that had once shaped her every step had softened into something she could carry without fear. That evening, as the sky faded into its muted blues, she returned to her son's room one last time. She placed the 2 beads, the ribbon, the metal tag, and the handkerchief inside the wooden box on the nightstand, not as relics of loss, but as threads of a story she was finally ready to hold without breaking. The dog curled on the bed again, but this time he shifted to make space for her. She sat beside him, laying her hand gently against his fur. The room felt full, not with what was gone, but with what remained. A quiet truth settled in her chest. Healing had never meant forgetting. It meant rediscovering the places where love still lived. The dog sighed, a soft exhale that felt almost like an answer. She whispered into the stillness, not asking for anything more, simply offering what she finally understood, a heart opening to life again. And in that moment, the room felt gently whole, A soft invitation followed in her thoughts, a single step toward tomorrow. If you feel moved by this journey, let the story stay with you, and share it with someone who might need a quiet reminder that love never leaves.